Okay, fantastic. So I'm gonna just do a mic check here. Welcome to the Uranus and Taurus live stream, everyone. And just make sure that I can hear. So what I would like to do to make sure that everybody can hear me loud and clear is just let me know in the chat that you can hear me. And yeah, okay, fantastic. So I'm getting some responses from some people letting me know that you can hear me, which is amazing. Okay, awesome. And also on, if you are joining us on the Facebook Live stream, just let me know if you can hear me as well. That would be super great. And then we'll kick this off. Okay, awesome. So fantastic. People can hear me. That's good on YouTube. And get some feedback. Yes. Okay. Amazing. So firstly, thanks very much for joining me today, everybody. I deeply appreciate that. I'm looking forward to really getting an opportunity to share some of my own personal explorations on Uranus's transit through Taurus. One of the things that I can definitely, I'm just going to quickly do something here while I change out the K. There we go, pop out. That's cool. All right. Okay. I'm just going to clear out some kinks over here. And then once I've done that, I will get back to my rambling. Okay. I'm just going to have to leave that like that. I can just see everybody's chats over there. So I can see that. Okay, cool. So like I was saying, so I want to share some of my own personal explorations of what Uranus and Taurus has meant for me. A lot of my inspiration, a lot of my insights have been, developed a lot with a conversation with Jen, and she's influenced a lot about how we have come to understand this energy. And so, what we want to try and put across today is our own, sense of how we can firstly integrate the nature of this energy going forward, and what is the potential? What is the potential that we can all access and harness through this next 7 years of Uranus's transit through Taurus, and what we would expect to a certain degree as well. I think this is a huge thing. What we can expect from it. I feel like one of the things to really acknowledge straight away is that we are living in a time in which, prior Uranus and Taurus cycles have brought us things, right? But within the context of this kind of place right now, I feel that there is a subtle but yet very profound shift in our awareness that is not about a paradigm of looking outside of ourselves, of something that is existential. And the establishment and the context of Uranus's awakening being something that leads us to something more beautiful outside, but actually something that causes a deep internal shift in the human psyche and its relationship to what man stands for, what human beings stand for in their relationship to this ecosystem of Earth and this ecosystem that is the universe. And so, in my view, there needs to be a kind of like discussion or maybe an embracing that the way that we can tap into or harness the potential of Uranus and Taurus for us individually, and then through that, kind of create a catalytic catapult going forward, or not necessarily even going forward, but just let's just go with the idea of moving in a direction. How that direction can look for us that in the past has never really actually happened. Okay. So I really love this picture because it speaks to me very deeply about the context of not only humanity's relationship to life, And I'm going to use that quite a lot during this conversation today, by the way. Humanity's relationship to life, human beings and their idea of their existence and the idea of our existence and our relationship to that. I feel that this is something that's super important to begin really contemplating in your own life, and how that relationship, when cultivated and kind of really we delve deeper into the process of this interconnectedness that the human race has with everything else around it, whether it be in our ecosystem at a cosmic sort of cosmic level of understanding our relationship to the universe and our galaxy and stuff like that, but then something that comes very closer more to the ecosystem of your own immediate environment, and how that ecosystem, you know, deeply interacts and interfaces with your individual journey, but as in the journey as the human being. So like I said again, I'm going to be using this idea of humanity's relationship to life and our perceptions of it, and how we digest it, and how we contrast our individual sense of identity about who we are and what we are in context to this universal largeness that is, you know, space, that is Earth, and the existence of it. You know, it's very profound, I feel, especially. So this picture over here speaks to me in so many ways. So the first thing, when you really begin to tune into the archetype of Uranus, okay, at a deeper level, you will begin to discover that Uranus has a strong association with the nature of fibers, okay? And fibers operating from a place of how they sporadically move in multiple directions, covering large spaces. And in some sense, even though Uranus is not really assigned to a mutable sign like Pisces, Gemini, and Sagittarius and Virgo, it still on some level creates this sort of electric charge that sends a pulse that then allows for expansion to occur in so many different directions. And so that's why when you look at this, when you look at the nature of Uranus and electricity as an example, and you'll see that me and Jen just recently recorded a video talking about the nature of Uranus's discovery, and how what that means to actually begin living in a reality in which Uranian energy and Uranian field is very present with us, and you know how that's shaping and reshaping our sense of self, which we talk about electricity and the association with it. So this idea of Uranus being something that's deeply connected to the nature of fibers as they expand in multiple directions and leading to sudden awakenings, so sudden insight, and how that branches off from an immediate fixed stream of awareness. So the fixedness in this communication, in this idea of Uranus, is where there is the solid tree root dynamic that's existing like this. It's going up, and then all of a sudden it just expands into a different direction. And it is in this nature of expansion from breaking out that is solid, or something that is essentially just fixed in its pattern, that leads us to awakening, right? And an awakening really just simply means an inclusion of a reality or a dimension of reality that opens your field up, that opens you up to perceiving and seeing things from a different perspective. So as this picture begins to open up this fiber dynamic of Uranus, it also reveals to me this essential truth. Okay, so to me, harnessing the Uranian in Taurus archetype has a lot to do with the harnessing of this truth, and that at this point in time, if we were to truly see a very deep, subtle layer of human necessity right now, and that is the process of how balancing between a feminine expression and or part of the psyche and a masculine part of the psyche. Okay, so the branching off of these two very important polarities within the stream of human understanding and consciousness. So these polarities that are, in a sense, really, really bloomed into our human awareness over the last, for our existence. So we have this very strong feminine understanding of existence that then led to the nature of the exploration of this very masculine polarity. So masculine being deeply logical, the idea of expanding one's awareness in a direction, and the feminine process understanding a deep interconnected with cycles, a deep interconnection with something that's more water orientated, a very feeling censoring based understanding of life, intuitiveness, right? So both of these branches of human understanding have really been exploding and exploring itself, okay? And the core of it, as in this tree over here, reveals to me this beautiful and yet profound, deep connection of human exploration of the balancing of these two polarities, okay? I was reading just a couple of weeks ago on, while I was researching the nature of Chiron's nodal axis. And in this person's own perception, right, he's in his own kind of way in which he defines reality. He was looking at the nature of the nearest galaxy that exists within our own solar system and galaxy. And this is Andromeda. And he's talking about the nature of how the spiral disks, i.e. that the Andromeda galaxy has these beautifully balanced spiral disks that are going out in separate directions. And he was suggesting, through his own deep intuitive exploration of his consciousness, that there is a kind of representation between the idea of humanity trying to, in some way, reach a state of harmonic balance between these polarities. Okay. Now, of course, what I'm really trying to put across over here in this deep unfolding of human exploration at the most deepest level, I'm talking like in so deep within our genetic profile that the context of the mind simply cannot really truly access this or grasp it. So it's a need for a deep contemplation and a deep connection to a union within the origins of life itself. And the contemplation arises this innate understanding. And so this polarity that we as a human race, or at least the field in which we exist within, trying to establish and balance these two energy patterns. And of course, in our sort of process of allowing these two polarities to essentially come into a balance, we have experienced and established and experienced realities where the imbalance of those two have occurred. And so we're kind of like still in my opinion, we're still kind of lost a little bit in terms of finding that process. And yet right now, in my view, that takes a long period of time. There is a very close sense of unification, of balancing these two, and at the spark in which these two unifications or these two sort of energies that will meet will actually then fuse this incredibly deep awakening into a higher state of understanding of the human psyche and its potential, and harnessing realities and the potential for realities in ways that we have not been able to fully comprehend up until this point in time. And I see this as, in a very sort of surface level, the marriage between science and spirituality. Okay, and so that's what I'm going to kind of get into today with Uranus and Taurus, and the potential of awakening that exists within this dynamic. And so here again, there's this tree that represents the fibering of awakening experiences that parallels between the high and the low. And what it's really representing to us with the imagery of the heart, which I felt was so incredibly crucial and essential in really putting across the idea of what I feel we could tap into with the potential of Uranus and Taurus. And again, the potential is that when we begin to shift our awareness from the idea of reaching some existential high state of superiority, okay, and begin to actually delve deep into the earth, in other words, that we're actually growing our roots of our essential self back into the ground and then going back into the earth, that we will reach a place within inside of ourselves in which the heart of our existence begins to actually not only be felt, but we begin to then exist within a reality, or begin to harness the potential of what it means to be interconnected deeply with an earth-based consciousness that is not looking at everything around it and saying, okay, we need that, and that resource needs to be extracted for our own benefit, but actually harnessing the values of what I want to put across today, which is, again, the idea of giving, and this process of really trusting in that the earth itself, or the nature of life, is so deeply interconnected with everything else in this web, that when we surrender into the idea of allowing ourselves to give in a way, or share in a way, that we're actually giving back to ourselves. And when we cut off that idea of sharing, we're actually hurting ourselves in return. So I'm going to come back to this point over here. Okay, so I know that isn't a tremendous amount of stuff to take in. And of course, the best thing to do really in this situation is kind of take time to digest what I'm sharing in that way. And I'm trying my best to be as coherent as possible. Okay. So let's see if, okay, fantastic. Okay. Okay. Oops, I've just lost all of the things, so I'm just going to get them back again. And okay. All right. So on this page over here, there's this hand, and this is really going to be the thing that I want to kind of guide us with today. Okay, with the, again, what I want to put across today is I want to incarnate the essence of Uranus's energy. I want to incarnate the essence of the Taurian energy. And so instead of just going with some sort of mental stimulation of Uranian or Uranus typed words and Taurus types words, and that, I actually want to, kind of embody the energy in this experience, and kind of really show how astrology is there for us to observe an awakening that's existing within us. And so when we can really grasp the nature of the energy itself, we can actually see it within our lives, and so harness the energy that is the archetypal play with this cosmos that is our astrology. So Uranus wants to awaken the highest ideals of Taurus, okay? And giving to others is giving to ourselves, all right? So now in this whole entire webinar / presentation, I want to really get into that, so that when we come to the end of this presentation, we really get to understand what this is truly about. And it's a very profound thing. So this Uranian energy, the idea of Uranus, is to break everything down that you feel secure within yourself. Your concepts, your defense mechanisms, all of this. Uranus wants to open pockets of where those defenses and blocks are, and boundaries are, and illuminate something that is existing in a field where the idea of it can't even be grasped, but it has to take time to process. So the idea with this over here is that Uranus wants to awaken the highest ideals of Taurus. And so giving to others, or giving to others, is giving to ourselves. And this is this beautiful interchange between Scorpio and Taurus within the context of the natural zodiac. Okay. All right. So let me just press that button there. Okay, so everybody can see my scroller. Okay, so I've got this natural zodiac over here. And first what I want to do is I want to show you this intimate relationship between the three signs, Pisces, Taurus, and Scorpio. And this picture, this imagery over here. And what I want to rekindle with ourselves is this intense, deep awakening and realization of what it really means to be human. Okay. That let's acknowledge immediately that there is this earthly based existence that we can feel with our senses. And so this idea of feeling your skin and the sensation, the idea of what that brings to yourself and how you can feel the aesthetics of the material plane. And when you take like this idea of taking roses and giving it to someone as an appreciation, saying to them, hey, by the way, here's some roses, they represent beauty, Taurus, and I'm offering it to you as an appreciation or a sense of love for you, or that this is how I perceive or see you. So that's what we do in a kind of a romantic relationship. A rose is always associated with that, right? And immediately you can even actually begin to sense the distortion that subtly sits around the idea of a rose through Valentine's Day and the materialism that comes with it, right? And yet at the same time, the essence of this idea of a rose representing something of beauty and then offering it in a state of beauty because it represents a deeper stimulation of one's senses and an appreciation for the beauty on the earth. That Taurus as an archetype is very much, as an earth sign also, very much connected with our ability to feel the material plane in a very sort of subjective way, right? It's very subjective in that sense. It's your personal need. It's your personal idea or relationship to the self. It's your personal sense of what pleases you aesthetically, okay? And then when we look at when we sort of begin to move from this very earth-based dense area, and we sort of look up at the sky, and firstly we see the Milky Way, and it representing to us an arc within our solar system and within our galaxy, that there is something even beyond that dark rift, right? And we can look at the sky, and immediately our sense becomes vast. Our sense becomes open. Our sense becomes that there is this infinite field that encapsulates our sense of self, that immediately reminds us of how small we are, and that this existence of ours at a material plane, even though from the perspective of us looking at a fly or a spider or an ant, for instance, can be like we're huge, and yet when we observe the galaxy and when we observe the nature of the sky, it just reveals to us the vastness. And so immediately we feel that that smallness within ourselves. And I feel like at the deepest battle and it doesn't have to be a battle, but it is at the moment in time, we're kind of trying to reconcile this idea of an ego structure that's deeply rooted in and deeply limited in its perception of this higher, deeper self that exists at a much larger level, and how we are actually trying to interface between this ego feeling its limitless, this smallness, and its responsibility to us, its responsibility in terms of defense to protect ourselves, so that when we're in a situation where there's clear danger, say for instance you're in a, there's clear danger, that the ego will signal certain impulses within the body's function to say, okay, pump cortisol and adrenaline through this person because he needs to run. And how important and incredibly useful that was at some point in our evolutionary journey. And then how that has become over time something that we don't need to rely on as much, because the process of what we are relying on through the evolution and the awakening of man in its relationship to the cosmos, as it deepens its sense of self and begins to harness a more profound understanding of life, that we begin to rely less on that dynamic, and we begin to sort of emphasize more of the other ideals and beliefs and truths and establishments and creations that we have, like for instance technology as an example, or human relations. And so what materializes deeply out of this relationship at one level is something of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And one of the funniest memes that I always like to use in a situation like this to like truly drive home what I'm talking about here is, before internet was available to us. And I think actually, ironically today, if you go onto Google and you'll see that they actually said the internet is 30 years old or something. I mean, can you really actually grasp that completely, right? that in the sense of the idea of the internet in terms of its collective thing, it's 30 years old. That's how youthful technology is within the collective process. And yet at the same time, we can immediately feel this connection with it in our lives as being like, wow, it's only 30 years. We've actually lived without it for so much more. So the idea here is that this Maslow's hierarchy of needs was established where the base need was psychological, things like sleep, for instance, and food, and just water and sustenance. And now that we live in an age, there's again talking about this meme that we've added the need Wi-Fi, right? This idea of Wi-Fi becoming an essential need right at the bottom of the pyramid. And I laugh at it so much because of the nature of its truth, that as we kind of evolve into deeper layers of awakening, that need-based dynamic becomes more, it evolves. And so naturally speaking, the context of what is needs evolves as we go through deeper cycles of planetary activations and awakening processes. And as we open up to deeper cosmic relationships to the sky, we begin to really, really sense that this whole relationship between ego, earthful self, and its need, and then this cosmic self that is pulling us to awaken into deeper realizations of meaning that cannot be conceptualized and cannot be, in a sense, just understood intimately. It requires a profound sense of spiritual crisis that leads us into confronting our own feelings of safety. And so here with this Taurus, with Taurus over here, we have this Taurus archetype that is our immediate defenses. It's our protection. It's the very thing that puts a boundary across something and says, this is what I'm comfortable with. This is what is my survival at the most intimate level. And when you look at Scorpio is looking at the other side of Taurus and saying, this is all great, but in order for the evolution to occur for us, we must break down those barriers of protection. We must awaken within ourselves our own defenses that are rooted in the ego saying, wow, that vastness is too much, right? And these are natural things. So it's not like we need to go run around going, okay, I need to break the ego open to experience the vastness, because we would essentially go insane. So periodically over time, we go through these intense cycles of spiritual awakening at a collective level, or a spiritual emergence. Let's just call it a spiritual emergence, in which there is a necessity for a profound awakening, because the road in which we have traveled has reached the end of the line, right? The road that we come to has now fulfilled its purpose. The cycle has been completed. And what is so subtly amazing about this process of a cycle completing is that truth is not something that can be made up in some random place. It's the acknowledgement that from a feminine principle, i.e. the dynamic of the feminine archetype, and that word in itself can be so sort of like, stripped apart into multiple distortions and ways of what people interpret it as. So in this conversation, I am simply stating that the feminine principle has this relationship to intuitive cycle and spheres, and how life is operating at an organic level without the idea of something being superimposed on top of it to tell it what to do. So a governing force that is on its own innate energy, that it exists in and of itself. So this process, okay, with this feminine principle is that that the cycle completes itself, and as the cycle completes itself, it just simply then returns to its origins. It returns back to the original form in which it was birthed out of. And so that's where Neptune comes into the process over here. So in astrology, and what you're looking at is called the natural zodiac. In astrology, this Pisces energy makes a natural sextile. So the sextile meaning just a 60-degree angle, and it's kind of like a prod. It just prods the other archetype. It just says, hey, by the way, I'm here to support you. So when we do experience the cycle of completion ending through the Scorpio archetype saying, okay, this is the end of the line, it immediately triggers off an internal awakening process of culmination, of sense of reflection, and then at the same time an intense sense of chaos and, oh my God, what's occurring as the fabric of reality dissolves into the nothingness. And then from that arises something refreshed, something that arises that is completely new in its place. And so out of that arisal, you can see that with Taurus and Pisces connecting over here, Neptune, currently at the moment, has been transiting through Pisces. And so now at the moment, it is 16 degrees Pisces. And Uranus is entering Taurus, and it will eventually at some point begin to make this sextile connection. Okay, so we already can see here that just through the astrology, in a very subtle way, that there is a message clearly here that the Uranian energy that is wanting to awake the Taurus is also coming out of and being birthed out of a spiritual emergence of something that is collapsing and closing in on itself, and that cycle is completed, and that there is something new that will now eventually become, or will be birthed out of it. And in that process, the very, very, very subtle boundary between the ego and its relationship to the sense of the greater whole becomes even more apparent in terms of that relationship between something that's deeply overwhelming, that is Neptunian, and something that is essentially there as a barrier to kind of support not being flooded and being overwhelmed. And so what we can see here that can illustrate this picture so beautifully is this relationship to like the ocean, and how the ocean waves just kind of subtly keep on lapping up against the rocks, or like a boat, for instance, and the boat is the ego structure, and the water just subtly keeps lapping up against the side of the boat, and it's that process. Somebody actually shared with me a long time ago in one of a live stream where they mentioned how when you grow, when you sort of come into the earth, you are in the form, this is not what they said, but I'll get to what they said, that when you come into the earth, your babiness, your smallness represents the life as it is in its original origin, okay? And then as you go through your life, you grow into the idea of the Saturnian housed structure. But as you get older in life, as you get to the latter parts of your life, do you notice how your skin goes from something that's deeply firm to something that is incredibly sensitive and soft? And it was pointing to the idea of aging being the relationship between the ego and how it has experienced the constant Neptunian field, and that relationship of touching each other all the time, until eventually the softness of your skin at the age of 80 is really representing the softening of the ego as it's a process of surrendering into a deeper self. And it was like, to me, the whole entire sort of, I don't know how long I've been speaking for, 25 minutes or something like that. That is my message with you today with this Uranus and Taurus. It is the process that our spiritual nature, okay, and what that has represented to us and where we have experienced it ourselves needs to be rekindled. And but it is essential that Uranus in this period of time wants to awaken that reemergence of our connection to a deeper self, okay? And that deeper self connection will essentially lead to the process of intimately connecting with Earth and its representation and its sort of function within the context of human civilization and life itself. And of course, this is not a live stream in which politicians and the global leaders and all of that stuff are listening to. So there's a very strong sense of awareness that a lot of this you already know. But if you can deeply begin to cultivate this idea within inside of yourself and begin to then live in a way that honors these habits, that does that, and then your work of spreading a message infuses itself within, subtly within the collective, there is a very strong potential that at some point it will just create a catalyst of wave, because there will be experiences within the consensus reality that will be perceived as a crisis, and that the idea of the crisis will, in a sense, elicit all of the subjective judgments of insecurities and fears that will then lead to certain decision making that to us will seem deeply, deeply like insane. And yet at the same time, you can see it in its own process, that what's arising is that very subtle, very frail, but yet very essential barrier between the ego and its relationship to the cosmos. And when a spiritual emergence occurs, that the capacity to actually integrate that process can be very, very, very uncomfortable and deeply disturbing. And because of that being the case, a natural knee-jerk response or reaction is to deal with it with pre-existing structures in mind, which of course at this point in time we know are rooted in very masculine ideas of dealing with things. Okay. All right. So, okay. So I'm going to move on and just kind of explain some concepts, and then we'll go on from here. Okay. So this picture speaks to me so beautifully, because what I want to put across today is something that I feel is essential in digesting and processing the idea of what it's going to take for us to begin integrating the spiritual emergence of this next phase of human evolution. Okay. And what I want to focus on here is nature showing us, okay, we are interconnected with nature. Nature is us. We are nature. So what we see out in nature is existing within ourselves. It's a deep bond. So I want you to observe the layers, the layers within the strata, okay, the layering structure within this rock, okay? And what I want to put across here is within this layering and within this structure, the form of Saturn, in other words, the crystallized experiences of what has been. So everything that has come along our journey at this point in time cannot be unpacked. Actually, I'm going to do this over here just so that you can see me again, because I'm done with that. Okay, so the strata, okay, of this rock, I'm wanting to point across that within the layering of this rock formation, it is the same within our psyche, and within our collective psyche, deeply, deeply, deeply layered are experiences in our history that through the experience of the history have essentially built pathways of behavior, pathways of manifestation. And so when we're exploring how to shift ourselves and how to shift the narrative, this is the key word here, shifting the narrative, shifting the story. If we can begin to see that it is crucial to shift the story, then what we can begin to help ourselves with is that as we build upon what has already organically been crystallized within our process of discovery of our humanness and so on, that if we continue with the same narrative, what we will be doing is incarnating pre-existing layers of hurt, of shame, of guilt, of distortion, of damage, of the things in which the inherent imbalance within the idea of this masculine feminine principle, okay, has occurred. There's nothing we can do about it. And I can see that the camera is freezing a little bit, but there's nothing we can do about it. It has occurred. We can't go back in time to rewrite it. But what we can do is we can acknowledge the nature of what has come. We can acknowledge the nature of what causes them. And then we can acknowledge the nature of what we can do to sow new narratives, new storylines within our lives that are rooted in new values. And so, Uranus and Taurus, through this presentation today, can potentially awaken, okay, can potentially awaken spiritual values that, when rooted in or seeding the idea of a choice that leads to a habit, that then becomes a behavior, that then becomes the most beautiful thing that you can understand about life, or one of the most beautiful things that you can understand about life, is that if you plant a seed and you allow time for the seeds to grow, okay, that life is about the observing of this process, okay, of the growing process. It is inherently in nature. You can see this with everything. Everything comes from an origin, bursts into creation, lives its existence through its individuality, and then goes back to the ocean, Pluto, right? And so we are no different. And so we carry with us the history of our process. We carry the history of woundedness from deep, ancestral lineage times, and we carry the trauma associated. We carry the patriarchal woundedness of rape and pillage and separation. All of those things. These are all here. And so for us, it's deeply baked within our psychology. It's deeply baked within our psyche. It's not just on the surface. Okay. Okay. So, what is the past? Why are we here? Okay, why are we here? So to me, it all originates from this place. It originates from the barrier of safety that is the ego, that is held by this over here. Okay, this barrier is put in place because it represents an absolute necessity for security and safety, and where we know where something begins and something ends. The psyche is needing this, okay? And so when we look at the relationship, when we look at this picture, we can see that this barrier over here, this railing, is not put randomly in the clouds or down there or in some odd place. It's put exactly where it's needing to be, okay? It's put at the edge of something that represents solid foundation, and something that then begins to be openness, vastness, okay? This dynamic of something that is deeply, deeply, deeply huge in that sense, that overwhelmingness, that vastness, right? Okay. So as we sit and contemplate this picture and we feel into the infinite field and its nature, and how we feel the ego's job of making sure that it protects us from something that's so overwhelming, we can begin to understand that as a human race in the past, this relationship has caused us to have to manifest in reality and create and understand reality from this place. So what it means to us is that we've needed to, up until this point in time, we've needed to find a way to deal with this insecurity. We've needed to find a way to deal with the context of what that feels like. And so in the most recent times, and when I'm talking about the most recent times, I'm talking about something that's, maybe even associated with like 2,000 years as an example, Virgo Pisces axis, okay, or age. This imagery here of man holding nature in his hand, okay, and to me this is what I want to put across here. The hand to me represents the idea of power. Okay, the idea of power, taking something in your own hands, right? Taking life in your own hands, the feeling of power, but also the idea of putting something in your hand. And in this case, it's nature. Nature cannot fight back from the idea of man at this point in time. So it is this process in which we began to see ourselves with our intellect as becoming superior to existence and to nature. And so slowly and developing, we would start to develop these ideas and these ways of being that would begin to separate us from nature because of our own quest for empowerment within ourselves, as we needed to do this. It's not something that's just random. It is clearly something that needed to happen through within us, okay? And so it is talking about the vulnerability also, this vulnerability that exists within this leaf over here. It can be easily crushed. And it also talks about the deep interconnectedness of spiritual awakening or spiritual understanding of surrender. That plant cannot fight back. It simply cannot. And so it's in a deep state of surrender to its fate. And that is something that I think threatens the ego and the collective mind at a very profound level, which then prevents from us actually truly accessing a deeper layer of what it means to awaken into or come into spiritual emergence. So during this period of time, it's very, very important to see and hear not only the defense mechanisms that will naturally arise out of the limbic system of consensus reality souls, but also within our own process as Uranus transits through a Taurus and begins to suddenly awaken subtle defense mechanisms that Taurus will want to hold on to within your life, that will say to you, oh, I don't know about this. It's like we're very, 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 can be very sensitive and aware to that fundamental relationship between the vulnerability of understanding life and its frailty, and yet at the same time, our relationship to wanting to dominate that in sense. So, our relationship to this idea of needing to be in dominance. And so what emerges out of this idea and this experience is, the idea of church. And again, I put this picture so clearly here because this is not an attack or a critical approach to the idea of religion. It is simply acknowledging that the human relationship and its relationship to life and the nature of what cultivates our necessity for what we think we need in times, and then we develop and harness these ideas that then become manifested in reality, that then over time we experience ourselves through, and we see this in ourselves. So what is emerging out of us that leads to this? And so that's where my question is. My question is, what is leading us to this point? What is leading us to understanding life at this point in time, and what do we need to go forward? And so in the past, we have created and established forms of structure of control, okay, that would give us a sense of meaning to the nature of life, because it's essentially inconceivable. Because at this point, when these things were being established, we didn't have the idea of medical medium. We didn't have the idea of healing cancer or these types of things, or the understanding of the body at this point. So either it was forgotten or we're sitting in this collective amnesia. It doesn't matter. The only thing that is very apparent and clear to us is that when a family was losing a child due to polio or some random disease that nobody could know of, because technology that now connects us on the internet instantly was not available at that time. And so messages of information of how to heal were so few and far between that if a child got sick and there was a message sent out to the nearest town to say, what do we do in this situation? That distance could leave us in a position, or leave the mother in the position knowing that there's a potential that child could die. Now, I was recently been exploring Friedrich Nietzsche's work, and we were actually having a conversation today, me and Jen, where we incarnated his essence, and it just developed into something so hilarious, because we were deconstructing the nature of reality until the point where it was like, okay, this is getting too, but and so I actually wanted to put it into this presentation today, but I clear it out because there was just too much. But the idea here that I wanted to put across was that in the analogy of this child and its mother, and the mother potentially losing a child, and what that could mean for that mother in that time, is the same as when, in this particular instance, Nietzsche loses his dad. And when you look at the transits of his natal chart, and when this occurs, you can see how this created this deep spiritual catalyst of him needing to reject the idea of some religious belief system that was pointing to an afterlife. And the point here is it's a complete loss of faith through an experience in which you look at the immediate reality and go, how is this possible? How could something so existential that's loving, and the idea of some existential being, truly represent love and devotion when something like this occurs? And it sends us into a deep search. And that search lands up being a beautiful way of understanding, again, the original imagery that I showed you between the ego and this deeper cosmic self that is existing at a very profound, abstract, non-linear, deep like exploration. Here we have manifested in this very Saturnian world this idea of an existential search for meaning. And this existential search for meaning has separated us from the essence of what it means to be human. Even though it has brought us to a realization of that process, and that in and of itself is natural. But the process that it has led us to is where we are today. And the spiritual emergence, or crisis, as it were, is forcing us back to rekindle something that is back into the heart, or into the place in which the inner space and the inner Godhead, as it were, is rekindled, and the amnesia is sort of dealt with in that sense. And so this existential salvation archetype has led us to a very deeply overstimulated masculine approach to us being in of service to some existential being, and all of the types of rules and regulations and judgments and so on and so forth, and punishments. And I was going to talk about this actually, the nature of punishment or discipline, and how discipline, from a very deeply distorted perspective, is the idea to control a behavior that from a social perspective is not acceptable because it causes an emotional reaction that we can't deal with because we don't deal with the inner emotional dynamic. We're trying to repress it. And so discipline becomes this idea of boundaries in place that is controlling behavior, i.e. emotional regulation, so that judgment, shame, and persecution from the outside world is not plagued on us. Whereas the healthy expression of Capricorn, or the healthy expression in which we want to explore a bit later on, and this is another shift in the narrative, is the idea of self-discipline, inner self-discipline, which is remotely different from the idea of regulating your emotions through existential beliefs and judgments that are placed outside, that are rooted in cultivating shame, basically, which then clearly goes to the Uranus and Taurus narrative of how most of us struggle to step into our essence and our value because we're dealing with all of these weird, displaced emotional dynamics that are separated from us because we can't embrace something that has the stigma of shame around it, because embracing that means getting face to face with a self that in our collective distortion has needed to be rejected. And the idea of rejecting something that is part of ourselves will just keep on mirroring itself back to you, saying, hey, I don't want to be rejected because nothing in nature is rejected in that way. So why are you doing this? So it's almost splitting the psyche. And through natural process, the psyche wants to reconcile that. So the more we repress something, the deeper the process of it coming to the surface will occur. And so, as you can see here, in this process, the past is coming back to the surface. Pluto through Capricorn, South Node through Capricorn, Saturn through Capricorn, and the emergence of this spiritual awakening dynamic is now reaching a head in which we can no longer deny it. Okay, and that no longer, or the ability to no longer deny it, will eventually lead to a recourse. And so my idea to here today is to not come to save the planet, but it's in some way, shape, or form the idea of inspiring us and you that are watching here to take something of what I've shared in the last however long this is going to be, and really come back to harnessing the potential of Uranus and Taurus to make your own life empowered, so that you then can go ahead and share that, and in a sense keep that flow going and reaching other people in that way with a message that truly awakens the inner dynamic, not the need for rejecting something that can't be processed because we don't understand it. Okay, so here we have religion, here we have the idea of separation, we have the idea of an existential faith. And so naturally what sporadically creates out of this is abandonment, right? The abandonment from the self, abandonment from the spiritual self, the abandonment of the true organic nature of our humanness, and the ego starts to become inflated. It's being given more power, not because it shouldn't be given more power, because you should give your ego power, but the role of the ego is to awaken the inner journey, not to go outwards into its inflation, to seek the destiny from an existential perspective. That's why we can't find our inner sense of self, because we're looking in the wrong place, right? So it's like, oh, okay, I'm going to go and find loads and loads of honeybees, but I'm going to look in a haystack and I'm going to be super confused why I can't find it. And it's like, that's what we're dealing with here, right? So this idea of coming back to the self to look for the thing that you are feeling the disconnect from is the realization that the disconnect is an internal process relative to the illusion of separation, which occurred through the idea of well, firstly, our consciousness only at a Saturnian level, but at the same time also put through the idea of faith. And so having faith and this idea of religion created domination. It created this idea of conflict. And so my God is better than yours. These are other dynamics, the idea of territory wars, scarcity, all of the things that the shadow aspect of Taurus will represent to us. So remember that story I told, that picture I showed you earlier about the right in the beginning, where it was the different layers of the rock formation. This I'm talking about as the primordial sense of where these formations have occurred and what we're dealing with. And deeply, deeply embedded within those are subtle memories within our Uranian mind stream that will remind us of where these dynamic or these layers of scarcity exist. And all you need to do is go and look at Dr. Gabor Matea's work and see that he points to the idea of it's not starting with you. Okay, and maybe that's not, maybe he wasn't the one that said that specifically, but this idea of trauma not starting with you is something that I think is essential to contemplate, because it acknowledges that the human psyche is not just manifested in a moment right now and all of a sudden you're here, but that we do carry with ourselves something, and we don't necessarily have to keep on digging into the past and living in there. It's the acknowledgement of things that have reached this point, and okay, here we are. We see that this is how we can change the narrative. So this picture over here elicits a very, very different sense of union between an innate idea of love and acceptance, right? It elicits the opposite. It elicits war, it elicits separation, it elicits the fact that human beings are looking at each other with all of these spears and these pikes that are about penetration and moving into something. And what it's pointing to is that our behavior up until this point in time has led us to not cultivating and developing a healthy relationship between the barrier of ego and the cosmic self. So here again, we have the separation that is deeply, deeply permeating the subtle fibers of our very existence. That even in your own psychological state and day to day is seen, because you can see how you can't just go out into the world and say, okay, I'm going to be radically different about this thing and I'm going to do everything for free and that's it. You simply won't survive. It's not the way that the society has built itself. And it's done like that on purpose to a certain degree. So this Uranus and Taurus is going to push through subtle awakenings within this fabric that are not existing on the surface, although we will feel it on the surface, but it is actually deeply embedded within this cosmic psyche, that eventually at some point the eruptions will feel itself, will emerge on the surface, and that's going to be deeply disturbing to the ego. And so the idea of the softening and the surrender into softening the hardness is so key, because the opposite of that is the realization of nihilism. The idea that this is just because it is. I mean, you can see the existence over here with the lack of meaning and that connection to that primordial sense of divine mother in which we all originate from. There's not one human being on the planet that just suddenly appeared, full form human being going, hi guys. Yep. We can validate this truth by the innate idea that we all have a belly button. We came from the primordial mother, and she birthed us into this existence. And so that origin is where Uranus and Taurus, to me, is pointing us back to, because it's in that state we will find the solutions for the dynamics of what this spiritual emergence is actually pointing us back to. Okay. So this separation, this idea, let this process sit with you of kings and queens fighting and using people to battle, and the idea of, oh, I just lost 1,000 people, so what, right? The disconnect between the idea of so much killing and going like, yeah, I don't feel that. Yeah. Okay. So now classic Mercury retrograde, there's an I missing in that. And I remember Jen saying to me, hey, by the way, just make sure that you go over the spelling of the things. And I said to her, it's funny because when you told me to say that, the word loss of faith is there. It's not saying loss of faith, it's loss of faith. So the I is missing. So, loss of faith. Okay. I want to put something over here that I feel is super, super important to acknowledge, okay? So, here we have a chart drawn in 1965 with the Pluto and Virgo generation, okay? And I didn't want to focus too much on the personal planets. I wanted to speak more to the nature of the conjunction that is occurring in Virgo. And I want to speak to the Neptune in Scorpio transit as the generation. And again, this Saturn Chiron conjunction didn't actually take place for a long period of time, but it was part of this emerging pattern, which I felt was really crucial to talk about. I think it's deeply misunderstood, this one, and so at some point when I do a Chiron teaching, I'll bring in the idea of Chiron Saturn conjunction, because when you look at somebody like Karl Marx, for instance, he actually has this conjunction, and he also has his Uranus Neptune sitting here in Sagittarius. Okay, and it was fascinating to me when I was just looking at his work that he and his Saturn return, he was extradited and isolated from France, if I'm not mistaken, because of his ideological belief systems that were threatening the very existence of these powers in B. Okay, and he actually came into birth just post the Age of Enlightenment, was from 1650 to 1800s, and he was coming into existence after that. And it to me, it really points to something that's being touched on with this current pattern of Sagittarius energy, Virgo energy, and Pisces energy, and then again Scorpio here. So this pattern of Pluto and Virgo 1966, 1965 in that area, is that this to me is where the original birth of the spiritual crisis or crisis or emergence, however you wish to describe it, is erupting from. Okay, so this eruption that we're beginning to experience right now, to me, that's where the birth of it was. Okay, and here's how I want to back this up, because at a very, very, very deep, I mean, I don't even have the time to deeply conceptualize the idea of these two planetary archetypes and their conjunction, but in a very subtle sense, this energy over here in Virgo reflects to me this generation that are coming onto the earth at this period of time, that now, so Uranus enters Aries, we fast forward to 2012, Uranus enters Aries, and Pluto's in Capricorn, and they begin to form this 7-aspected square that will take place, for the whole of 2013 and 14 and 15, 16, 17, and then sort of stop connecting with each other and so on. Yet the vibration and the reverberation of that outer planetary energy has deeply awoken something seeded within the collective and within, yeah, right, exactly. Green guy for you. Marx has led more people to death and torture than any other individual. I agree with you over there. There's definitely something dark about the nature of that human being's existence. But what I'm pointing to is that this conjunction over here is seeding this crisis, and the reason why I'm seeding is because of the nature of its conjunction. And as this conjunction begins to emerge into the collective at the square, we start to see at a collective level the process of social media coming online and the ability for our capacity to see how the birthing of this process has led to the crisis in which, when you look at the Pluto and Sagittarius cycle, so let me just do that over there. Here's the Pluto and Sagittarius generation. Okay, so here they have Pluto and Sag, right? Now, just forget about the personal planets over here, but Look at the context of Uranus in Aquarius and Neptune in Aquarius. And this particular conjunction was Chiron conjunct Pluto here. Okay. To me, there is a deep, deep symbiotic relationship between the year 2000s and, on one level, the idea of George Bush, from America perspective, leading the whole entire nation to believe, of course, most of you didn't on some level, but believe that there are weapons of mass destruction. And the point here, from what I've researched, and I don't live in the States, but maybe you guys can correct me if it's the case, but from what I've researched, the idea of getting the States on board was pushing an ideological belief system that threatened the very security of the nation's structure, and through that process got everybody on board to believe in something that was of blind faith, because there was no proof, it had to be made up. And what I'm pointing to within the context of this symmetry between these two generations is that the spiritual emergence was coming out of this deep, deep disillusionment of blind faith and ideologies and perspectives that were rooted in something that were more fantasies to do an agenda than to actually deeply connect with the idea of what it means to really connect with God. So God is actually used as a vehicle for the means to get things that were for an existential need of resources and what I need and what was threatening my security versus the collective's good. And so in that process, the year 2000s was deeply all about this recognition and belief in something. So when you look at the Pluto and Sagittariuses and you study them very carefully and closely, you'll see climate change comes into play. I mean, you can't even make this stuff up, right? Pluto goes into Sagittarius, and in the year 2000s, Uranus and Neptune in Aquarius, and Uranus also correlates to the stratosphere. So immediately we're looking at the nature of ecological crisis occurring because our relationship to the Earth, in this case, is not connected. And the connection has been birthed out of the idea of an existential searching for meaning, rooted out of our need to find meaning because of the subtle and yet deeply apparent relationship between the ego self and the little man and the little person and its relationship to the God cosmos. Okay? And so in this process of coming into the year 2000s, what it assimilated was the Pluto and Sagittariuses realizing that they're inheriting an Earth in which there's huge memory, in which their own lives, they remember and rekindle at a subconscious level these wars that were based on religion, these wars that were based on searching for an existential being, and that leading to mass trauma at a collective level, Uranus and Neptune in Taurus, like the idea of something that is outside of themselves. And so you'll speak to a lot of Pluto and Scorpio, Pluto in Virgos, who essentially came into this process of rejecting the idea of God. And the rejection of the idea of God is Neptune in Scorpio. Okay? Now, let's try and get into this process, right? The idea of Neptune in Scorpio is, and for all of you that are Pluto and Virgos, on some level you will feel this intimately, okay? And I'll speak to you directly about this. Every one of you on some level has this deep, deep inner Neptunian feeling that cannot be described to anybody, but yet can be articulated and sort of in some level kind of like shared, but the feeling inside of yourself can only be felt because the collective feels it, but you need to be talking to them, is this deep inner sense of recognition that the abandonment of the true origin of self exists within you. And this abandonment of the true origin of self leads you into this idea of needing faith to console this deep inner disconnect from the primordial meaning of life. And that as that kind of plays out within your life, you search for something, you search for this deep meaning, and yet you feel this deep crisis every time you come into certain beliefs and ideologies that revert you back to, oh my God, even though this is something that I'm searching for and has these ideals, they just seem to not really fulfill this inner void that exists within me that says something is missing, and the idea of God cannot be fulfilled because it's something outside of myself. And so I'm going to continue searching subconsciously until at some point I find union with it. And now, within 2016 and so on and so forth, in this area right now, what you're feeling into and what you're sensing at this stage is the dissolving of these duality barriers within yourself that is leading you to a connection that is subtly touching that Neptunian field, which is the infinite field of consciousness, the truth, the absolute truth with no ego definition or judgment about it. And that is what you're subtly being moved by with this Neptunian wave that is moving you into a deeper yearning for that connection that you know is really the internal self. Okay? The internal self. And that internal self is the deeper unconscious. It's the deeper me or the deeper you that doesn't have an identity, that is so unified. And so that Scorpio archetype is pushing you to rekindle that. And so now, as we accelerate ourselves to the year 2000s, and you see the Pluto in Sagittarius souls coming onto the planet, and you can see how in the world right now there's just mass information. And so what do you need to believe? How do you navigate in a world in which the internet is available and there's just so much information? What's true? What's not true? Are there global conspiracy theories? Is there a shadow government? Are the people that are spraying in the air chemtrails, or are they doing this? There's so much confusion about what the nature of the truth is that these kids that are growing into this world are actually looking at it and going, okay, is this what we're inheriting? Is this what we're coming into? And it is adding to this collective realization that they are emerging into a karmic pattern in which the very thing that will lead them to reunion with healing our planet and healing with ourselves is that their original separation from God. And so it will branch into two dynamics. It will branch into an absolute mental stimulation of scientific need, and so therefore there is no God, because the idea of God in itself represents the church at a collective memory level. And so because of that, there's a search for deep truth. And that deep truth will lead to a deep scientific, or an overstimulation of scientific mental Uranian sort of disconnect. And it will be like, no, science is the only way. And so we need to protect the earth by doing climate change things like spraying stuff in the air because we need to control it. And then you have the other side of the Pluto and Scorpios, in which their deep loss of faith leads them into this deep exploration of no meaning and finding a tribe and aloneness and alienation. And even though they're still super young at this point in time, Uranus in Taurus will begin to square this whole entire generation's Uranus in Aquarius. So let me point this out to you guys. Here's Uranus in Aquarius. So for these kids that are born with that Pluto in Sagittarius conjunct Chiron there, you'll see that when Uranus hits Taurus at 1 degree, it's going to start squaring their Neptune. And eventually when it's going to move like this, it will begin to square their natal Uranus as well. So they're emerging into their first cycle in which their first Uranus square has taken place. And what is that Uranus square showing us? It's showing us that this original seed that was essentially embedded within this new phase relationship with Uranus and Pluto is going to come onto the planet, and we're going to first experience the realization of, oh, we've got this issue with the earth, we've got this crisis, we're living in this idealism of looking at the world and saying, okay, there's separation, why do you have money, why are there homeless people, what is this all about? And it all comes back down to this process of people in power, people disadvantaged, people not understanding their power, people not understanding their resources, giving their power away, establishing and still supporting an ecosystem, which again, Uranus and Taurus, it's not going to look at the human race and go, okay, guys, we already recognize that it's very important for you. Let me just go to the next slide. It's very important for you that we take things slowly. This is Uranus talking to Saturn, by the way. So Saturn is the governing field of our sense of security. And Uranus comes along and says, okay, humans, We really have a soft spot for you right now. We really want you to feel sort of, that we're here to support you. And so we're going to take this process very slowly. No, that doesn't happen. Uranus comes along, it creates a sudden awakening experience, and then we integrate the process. And that awakening experience can be a deep decentralization of all security structures that are rooted in survival and need for survival, because they are essentially dying out. And so what dying out means is that everything that you've invested into that is supported of the old paradigm will no longer work for you going forward. And so in that process, we will go through Neptune at 3 degrees. Can you see it here? Neptune at 3 degrees at Aquarius. For all of this generation, they will have Uranus making a square to that Neptune, indicating an absolute crisis. Right, so you have the Swedish girl last year in August that decides to protest outside our school, saying, why do I need to go to school if our planet is dying? We've got these people in power. They're not doing anything about it. We're not looking at the world the right way. And so I'm going to go on an activist thing and try to spread the message that we need to look at the world in a different way, right? As an example. Or another example is March for Our Lives, March 2018, social media, right? Uranus in Aquarius, it comes into the world. And the seed in 1995 could not have created the awakening experience that social media would do. So the seed is there, but it is only in this period of time right now that the platform of something like social media and the incarnation of Uranus through Aquarius and Uranus and Neptune through Aquarius has led us to be able to then set up a platform. So everything is existing in a phase. And this process of a phase is leading us to what? On one level, interconnectedness, but also the idea at the same time that interconnectedness is not there for us to get disassociated with, paradoxically, right? So we have this technology that can easily disconnect us, right? And that's a big thing that's occurring right now. So if you even follow the work of Richard Grannon on YouTube and his recent documentary, he's trying to really encourage us to understand that this 30 years of internet, the shadow aspect of this technology, is pushing us to this disconnect, and we've got to be careful of it because it's there to reunite us. But if we are not reunited here in the heart of that Uranus and that picture that I showed you around the beginning, if we're not united here, then we are essentially disconnected in the ether, in the stratosphere. We're not on the body. We're not going to heal anything. So anything that materializes out of it is not going to actually come of benefit, because we need to come back to this place. And this imagery, what I've just shared with you right now, is showed you how that disconnect's taking place. And the Pluto and Sagittariuses will carry this very, very deep-seated remembrance of the disconnect and the trauma that has materialized out of that, and how the loss of faith is the spiritual issue. The loss of faith, the loss of the meaning, the disconnect from that inner space, and how that needs to be rekindled as the next phase. Okay, so here you have this picture over here, and I just love it so much because it deeply illustrates this idea of that through our disconnect from nature, you can see how life is being taken away. See how life has been removed from this. It starts to decay. It starts to decay. Now, in that original picture, I showed you Neptune and I showed you, or Pisces and Taurus. Well, when life is taken away, Scorpio, or the cycle ends, decay starts to occur. Why does decay start to occur? Because it's the natural function of putting something back to its original form. Okay? So in this process, this disconnect, this loss of faith has led us to establishing values and belief systems and ideologies and everything that are rooted in this disconnect. And so this is the repercussion. And the problem here, guys, is not, it's so easy to now take every single judgment that we have internalized and all of the issues and all of the things that we carry within ourselves and all of the burdens of life. And now Simon's putting this whole entire friggin' burden on top of me. It's my fault. It's not going to work, right? So the acknowledgement of the disconnect is what I'm really trying to push here today and suggest, so that when we begin to heal this, it is the regeneration process. It's not going, okay, well, shit, it's my fault, I'm such a bad person, because then that just reinforces the whole entire belief structure of religion and its idea. It's to restate the narrative that, okay, that's where we've been, this is how our choices are. Now we can begin working on something that is going to regenerate that. And the regeneration is the reunion back to the original separation. The core of it was the separation. The core of it was the disconnect. So when we can begin to heal that and work on that, firstly, that barrier of shame's not there. It's just this exciting journey of rekindling something that's deeply primordial within us. And the Pluto and Virgos carry that deep sense of, hey, there's a union that has been broken. And out of that union has materialized the generation Pluto and Sagittarius that show us. I don't want to believe in some leader. How is this person? You can see what they're manifesting. Like, I can't believe in that. And that on a very deeper, subtle level is actually their own reincarnation saying, hey, I've done these, I've slain people in religious wars, and all it brought me was nothing but deep-seated guilt and the abandonment of God. So it's the coming back to the separation and healing that will truly, truly, truly transform us. And so you have this process again. Okay, this idea in the world that we have right now, he has this one person, this Taurus archetype. I need everything for myself because the idea of security and the universe, I'm disconnected. And so I need you to go and do that for me and harvest that. I can eat that. And then this is how it's set up. So how many of us sit in this position in points of time and really know your inner truth? How many of you really, really feel the deep fated destiny that you can trust at such an intimate level that you can say, I can do this whole entire, I spent the whole entire day setting this whole thing up. And the point here is that it is where this energy exists within me, and then putting it out there and going, okay, this is the gift that I want to share. So Georgia, who's, I know you're part of the chat over here, you talked about Charles Eisenstein's, I've got his book over there, Jen's been talking about a lot, of the gift economy. And, if you're part of the chat, or Jen, you're part of the chat, please post in there again, the link to his work to indicate what he's talking about, because he's in a sense, he's trying to push the idea of really rekindling that separation that is in with us, which of course requires a tremendous amount of trust in that sense. But he has the idea of selfishness. Okay, it's all for me. I need it all for me. Okay, so I'm going to hold all of this over here because I'm scared, but I don't know how to acknowledge it and I don't know how to feel that. So I'm going to get you to use your energy. So I don't have to use mine because I need more. I need more, I need more, I need more. Okay, so that is that disconnect. That's what's materialized. I need more. And so the narrative needs to change. The narrative needs, why do I need all of these things? Okay, so the present. What can we do in this moment in time? And again, I come back to this picture, place of belonging. How many of us feel at this point in time that you have a sense of belonging, a sense of deep union with the nature of life itself? Even though you might be rekindling that, even though you might be feeling into that experience, you can feel how your roots, original picture of the Uranus and Taurus, is not there. So it is the process of putting the roots back into the earth, of going back in there where your abundance and resources were. So you take a tree and you place the tree, and then there's nothing on the soil. The soil is not nourished. The soil doesn't have the natural cycle. So it's completely barren. And you put the tree on top of that, and the roots want to grow into the ground because stability and that comes from the ground, right? It's interconnectedness. Life is showing that our place and our sense of belonging, that deep severance, is why we are here. And that is what we want to work with. We want to work with working back with that. We want to be digging back into the ground, and Uranus and Taurus awakening where that separation has occurred within us, and how that will begin to, as we get into that process, it will bring up empathy. It will bring up this idea of giving. It will bring up this emotional sense of seeing humanity in its suffering, and begin to open up our hearts in that way. Okay, so it's the place of belonging. I really wanted to, on my desktop, I've got loads of pictures of nature, and I wanted to put across nature because I wanted to really, really drive home the point that when we look at reality through Facebook and we look at reality through the idea of internet and stuff like that, we don't really get to see the beauty of things like this. And because we don't get to see that, we don't feel its essence, we don't take it in all the time, and it doesn't hardwire our neurological synapses to really understand the depth of what this picture is actually telling us. Okay? Just in the middle is the core of the primordial center that from everything life expands from. Nature is the best guru. Nature is the best teacher. And what's beautiful about this process is that in the idea of the separation, it was the existential idea of looking for God there. And if we come back to ourselves, we will see nature. And in the process of nature and the rekindling in its relationship to it, we will begin to form a bond with ourselves that not only awakens deep, deep insights about the cosmic relationship to the universe, it also doesn't traumatize the little ego saying, oh my God, I'm looking at the abyss, and now I need to make sure when I'm looking at the abyss that I need to stay safe. We will begin to sow the seeds of behavior patterns. And so this is what I see the potential for us right now. Okay, so we plant the seeds, and in our lifetime, we might see the tree begin to bloom, but we will not see it create the shade for us. It will be for the generations to come. Just as the same thing with Moses and his story. This is not the exact point of his story, but the idea of him being given to lead the people. But his time, his Saturn time, was to lead the people there, and that was his role. And in this whole entire process, we are in this place of connecting with something. And as we connect with it and we rekindle this and we begin to put the seeds and begin to plant the seeds back into the idea of healing, the next generation will experience that. And we are not doing it for ourselves in this moment. We are doing it for the nature of life, and we're honoring its cycle. And we are a part of that. And it immediately dissolves the ego's narcissistic idea of selfishness. And it sees it as an interconnected process of awakening waves of continual human understanding of itself at a deep, deep level, coming back to that original process right in the beginning. And each of us has this unique role in this process. It's not just that we're part of a whole and that we need to dissolve ourselves. No. My role in this process, as I feel myself, is this inspiration to remind us of that disconnect. And somewhere inside of myself, I feel that disconnect. And as I heal it inside of myself, I have the connection between what that means for me. And then I gift that. I gift that. Just like as in the book, right? The gift of life. Life is gifted to us. And so when we take from it and we gift back to it, everybody is gifting to each other. And so the process of the Aquarius age, that everything cycles within itself. As we give to one, we use what we need and we move it along. As we trust the idea of energy will come back to us in another way and we give it along. And so we consume what we need and move along just to sustain the physical form, but nothing more than that, because the spiritual awakening process does not need to be sustained through material. Okay, so yeah, you have this connection of the primordial awakening process as it flowers. And you know that that leaf over there is where we are. And as we awaken, it expands into deeper layers. So in the next 7 years, we will be cultivating the expansion of what that will be. So we will see it progressive. Okay. Okay. I love this meme. Somebody shared it the other day and I thought it was great. So I was going to say, hey, by the way, I'm going to use this. When you have more than you need, build a longer table, not a higher fence. There's nothing more to say about this. It illustrates the fact that this meme is in existence, clearly indicates what has occurred. It also clearly indicates what the spiritual emergence is about. And it also clearly indicates what we can do to cultivate. Yeah? Right? It's connectivity, it's union, it's bond, it's belonging. It's not separateness. It's not you have more than me, and so therefore I need to feel guilty or ashamed or, oh my God, I'm not succeeding in life. I need more, cultivating more action, until eventually your adrenals go, look, dude, sorry, but you're going to shut down. And then eventually when you shut down and your adrenals don't work anymore, you'll get the picture. All right. The adrenals cannot be more, it can't be more stressed. And the more stressed it is, the more people just have burnouts. Yeah? Okay. This is what we're cultivating in your actions. Okay. So I'm going to read it over here. Real sustainability does not mean the ability to continue our present energy-intensive consumer-driven culture. Okay? Real sustainability does not mean the ability to continue our present energy-intensive consumer-driven culture, but sustainability for all of creation, for the living earth to which we belong. We belong. And this is not me. I never wrote this. This was actually from some dude that I will post in the comments below, as well as the this is a quote from Spiritual Ecology, and it's just amazing. It just emphasizes the whole entire idea. This is it. Can you see what I'm talking about here, guys? That in this process of where we have come from, acknowledging that process where we've gone into, it has led us to the sustainability, the idea of sustainability. This is Uranus, right? It fractures the concept and the process and the notion of sustainability being, oh, I need to sustain this to continue going forward. It's radically changing the narrative to such a point in which the idea of sustainability becomes something that supports and sustains our sense of belonging, which is our earthly connection, in which that connection was severed to begin with. You get it? And so if everything that you take away from today, it is that. Right? Okay. So just some imagery to inspire us about what is Earth, what is nature, look at the beauty, right? It heals post-traumatic stress response. It heals the vagus nerve, right? It heals all of these deep human traumas that exist. It brings us back to harmony. It brings us back to unity. It brings us back to Taurus. This is what I was referring to earlier, right in the beginning, that the Taurus archetype is the senses. It's this imagery. It stimulates within ourselves the beauty, and it reminds us that yes, there is suffering and there is these things, but if we can just remind ourselves that each of us has this beautiful innate gift, that when we awaken, this innate creative intelligence that awakens within you. That's why like astrology and human design to me is so amazing, because they are tools to subtly and slowly awaken the process of individual self to where you can see your gift, and that you don't need to be running around doing all these billions of things to try and self-improve in the idea of, oh, I need to learn more, but just to be coming back to that place and saying, you know what, like in my case, right? My rave psychology, for those of you that are into human design, my rave psychology talks about the way that my visual cortex is established. I see the needs of the people. I see what people need. I tune into it deeply. I'm sensitive to that. I'm also sensitive to the nature of where I see empowerment and disempowerment. So if I just attune to that and I state and I trust in that process, I don't need to do anything else, because it's my innate creative intelligence. It's there. I just need to harness it. You just need to harness it yourself. Okay, so there we go. Llewellyn Vaughan Lee, thanks very much. Georgia, I appreciate that for everybody that's in the chat over there. That was the quote. Okay, so this is the point here, right? Every single one of you has this innate intelligence. It's all there. That's Uranus. Uranus is pointing to the individual self, that within all of creation, it exists in original thing that is innately there. You don't need to question it. It's there. A tree doesn't go, oh, damn it, you know what? I wish I incarnated as that flower. I'm so jealous of the process of its nature. Because immediately when you're comparing, you're like, oh, I'm rejecting my individuation. And when you reject that individuation process, you don't see your destiny. You don't see your light. And so this is the point here. The point here is not to go out there and more activism for chemtrails, things to create an atmosphere in which you can protect from the sun. It's about returning back to the original spiritual values that are held within ourselves, that have always been there, but through the illusion of separation and scarcity and fear, we have convinced ourselves and established a world in which that's deeply rooted. And right now, the spiritual crisis and emergence is the realization of that separateness. And these are the paths. Okay. One of the things that this imagery provokes with me is the coldness that sits with the separation, and how in the distance over there, there's the thawed out land and how it connects with the frozenness. And it, to me, there are so many things that I can talk about because it's subjective, right? One, it refers to this process of awakening the deep inner river within you, the emotional river within you, the feminine within you, the nurturer in you, the capacity to sense and feel within you, and that frozenness leading to the thawing out into which you can begin to feel the fabric of your own earth, your own like ground, this imagery that sits over there, your own postures, your own grass, your own sensations. That's the first thing. The second thing it also points to is the nature of emotion. Okay. And the nature of emotion being something that in the past has been rejected because of what it has represented to us. We understand it, blah, blah, blah. Coming back into the state of knowing that we will go through these ebbs and flows of different states of emotion, and we've got to learn to become open to the idea that feeling, even though Capricorn wants to repress it and help us say, no, we've got to keep things safe, into the idea of chaos, into the idea of living in the moment in that way. And even though on some level, there is a fine line between just simply walking into the middle of the street and causing chaos and saying, oh, I'm causing chaos because someone told me that. No, there is an idea of common sense here. There's an idea of natural law, but meaning in the sense that certain experiences in your life will come into your life to awaken deeper self-understanding. And that if we can open up to that process and not repress it in that way, there's a whole entire field of something that has always remained distant from us that will become alive within this process. Okay. So I know these are random pictures, but to me, they want to really point across here is that, again, in nature, it just illustrates this beautiful, there's this line that exists within us that always stays the same. It is the trajectory. And within that process spans off different experiences. And the more that we open ourselves up to the fabric of our life, reveals our experiences and the nature of just opening up to diversity will cultivate more space. It will open us up to exploration. So to the tree, this space over here is open. But the moment that we sort of recognize the strong sense of self that we can cultivate, as we explore different paths, we open up to different experiences that eventually over time get nourished into the tree trunk that eventually becomes the roots of wisdom. Okay. So Uranus wants to awaken the highest ideals of Taurus. Giving to others is giving to ourselves. It is the process of beginning to realize that up until this point in time, the hand has always said, okay, I want to take for myself. I'm going to consume, I'm going to take for myself. And as I'm going to take for myself, I'm going to be reinforcing not only to myself, but to whoever outside that there is no abundant resource. I'm going to go into the ideal, into the idea, into the belief that there is inherent lack of resources, which on some level, with the rape and pillage and the nature of just exhausting it, that there is. But the resource in terms of the new self or the emerging, that what the spiritual crisis or emergence can bring to, is that it's in abundance. And the abundance is the realization, the expansion of your own reconnection with your infinite field. And in that place, we have never been there in the way that we have over the last 2,000 years or something, or even longer. And so there's an abundance there. And so if we can tap into that, we can actually give. And when we give, we're giving the gift, like in this conversation today. In this whole entire conversation today, this is me saying to you, hey, by the way, I'm taking my energy, I'm giving it to you because I want to imprint into you. This is my gift to you. If it has brought you value in that sense, if it has brought you something of deeper meaning, it's woken yourself, then that is my achievement. And so giving that in that sense is also me saying, trusting that whatever it is that I give on some level will come back, allowing that process to naturally unfold and reinforcing it within yourself. And of course, at the same time, there's discernment. It's not like blind faith of just sitting around and saying, okay, I'll just sing around and do this thing over here, and all of a sudden things will just fall on my lap. It's not like that. We're not at a point in which this entire structure is existing. So it is a process of being where we are right now, and allowing yourself to understand that Uranus is entering Taurus will awaken these ideals. And progressively and slowly we'll begin to see the world change around us relative to the spiritual emergence. And you know what you need to be doing in this time. Okay? All right, so I think that is that it? Let me just have a look at the... Yeah, that's it. Okay, friends, thank you so much for this opportunity to talk to you about this over here. I think that, we've been here for almost 2 hours or something. What I would like to do, maybe we can just do a small chat or just like interaction with you guys on the chat. But that's what I have to share with you today. I hope on some level that's really conveyed and put across a deep meaning, and it's brought you something in that sense. So, okay. Where is the chat box? All right. Okay. So thanks very much to all of you that joined this live cast and found something in this process. This is my contribution to the astrological community and into the people, in which the idea of using astrology as a doorway and a portal to open up deeper layers of human experience that hopefully can contribute to something far beyond the idea of something just immediate. This idea of just getting something now, just getting something now, just getting something now, but really seeing the long-term goals of sustainable action rooted in ideals that are about giving to the awakening of the rekindle of the primordial self. Okay. So yeah, so thanks very much everybody for joining. I hope that you found a lot out of this. Is there anybody that's got like a question or two that they want to talk about? The one thing I want to put across is that I won't be able to respond to how this will be working in your natal chart specifically, of course, because that's a whole entire different ball game. But I do encourage you at some point in time, if you feel the need to well, not the need, but I do encourage you to explore it and okay. So yeah, like I said, if there's one or two questions or anything that you want to point across or me to clarify through this presentation, let me know. And okay. So green for you, green guy, green for you, green guy for you. Do you feel that this Uranus and Taurus relates to human design in 2027? Yes, I do. I do feel that it has a very strong association with that whole entire philosophy and cosmology. I actually did a lecture last year in the States where I looked at Uranus's return. So Uranus will actually be doing a full return to its own place of discovery, and Chiron reaching the same point where it was discovered as well, and the context of where the idea of existential beliefs or ideals or searching for meaning through authority will collapse. And because of that collapse, because of the necessity of the idea of breaking that paradigm and the spiritual emergence, we will be left with, how do I navigate this world without that? And so that's where, again, it will come close to the realization of why we materialized our past, because we will become very, very clear of that sense of ego self connecting with the infinite field, and why at that point we needed it. Whereas now we have certain tools available to us that on some level can allow us to access that or accelerate that. It may not actually be the case in the future. We rely a lot on the internet at the moment. Okay. So Pluto will return to the placement it was when Uranus was discovered. So a whole entire Plutonian cycle. Sorry, thank you very much, Jen. Pluto will return to that point, and so reflecting an integration of the Uranian cycle since it was discovered. Yes, there is a there are real people suffering from a lack of resources. The illusion that some humans are entitled to more resources than others. Uranus and Taurus awaken that, and that's the path to the highest ideals of Taurus will come through the spiritual emergence. And I don't believe that the nature of the energy at this point in time will take people that have got those ego intentions and go, you guys are fine, it's all good, we're just going to bypass you and kind of do everything else. It's like everybody's in it together. And so that uniting will really, really bring home that Neptune and Scorpio for the Pluto and Virgos, because at that point you will realize that what you were really coming into this earth with, and you can feel it, and you were trying to find out what it was through kind of getting into different spiritual practices and stuff, it will become awake to you in the next 2-3 years. Watch. Yeah, exactly. And humans are operate on nature's timing, as nature's abundance is dependent on timing, not humans' thing. Exactly. So that's that disconnect of natural time. So Adrian asking, do you believe that strong Uranian transits can feel soft and beautiful if we are in a place of love and expansion? Good question. I don't actually know, to be honest. Probably because I don't have any experience of it. However, I could actually contradict myself by saying that the potential, or the possibility of something like that existing is true, because Uranus in itself is there to awaken that place of love and expansion that comes through Neptune and Pluto. So really, it's about the nature of the ego and its relationship to the to the imprint or incoming energy field, or the awareness of what's coming into the field, and how it liberates you from the shackles of your own Saturn dynamic. So yes, in that sense, I could absolutely say that a Uranian field can definitely feel soft and beautiful if the ego structure is not in a defensive state because of its own insecurities around something that it can't perceive in its physical form. Okay. Awesome. So anybody else in the chats that you know got some questions? I can see that if you've got questions for Jen or anything for that. Kind of running out of words in Mercury retrograde over here. So I only intended the stream to be like an hour and 10 minutes long, but I consciously was like, okay, I'm going to do this in this way, but it didn't land up being that way. But I'm also going to try to sort of be a little bit more soft on myself and not feel like I didn't meet my expectations. And so I hope, like I said, you know, I really hope that I know that this time was valuable to yourself. So, okay. Cool. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We deeply appreciated your time and attention, and I know that you feel the same way as well. So I think we're going to be signing off. Oh, sorry, Queen D, you said, did you miss my question? Yes, I did. Let me go up to, okay, there we go. Is this the influence of sexual crimes coming out? That's a good question. Also, I don't know enough because I haven't explored it enough to know if that's absolutely true. But what I can say to you is that Uranus in Taurus and Pluto's transit through Capricorn and the South Node in Capricorn and Saturn in Capricorn can deeply point to distortions within the collective around repressed emotions and unresolved sexual tension through the structure, the stratosphere, and the structure of the way that we as a human race govern ourselves and the repression of what's natural to us. And so again, as we talked about, this Uranus will begin to shatter these defense mechanisms around us through the archetype of Scorpio, because it's penetrating it. It's saying, hey, by the way, the spiritual emergence is coming out. You've got to know that the Pluto and Virgos all have Neptune in Scorpio. And so because of that Neptune in Scorpio, that Uranus will transit their natal Neptunes. And in that process, that Uranus will awaken this collective unconscious repressed trauma that exists over there, and as a byproduct, what was unnatural will essentially come into the field and say, hey, this is here. So sexual crimes, I would absolutely assign to these dynamics at this time because of the need for purification and the purging out of this. Whether or not this is actually the case itself completely 100%, I'm not too sure. But yeah. Cool. So I'm super happy for you, Ola. That you've at least had some Uranus opposition things that have come beautifully for you as well. Thanks very much, Ellen. I deeply appreciate your gratitude towards myself and Jen. We spent quite a few, I think it's a week, just kind of like tapping into this energy. I wonder if I completely done justice today in terms of what we've spoken about, but hopefully we would be able to, continuously keep sharing information that really pertains to this idea of re-emerging the sexual disconnect, the spiritual disconnect that essentially is there. So, that's it. So thanks very much, everybody. I'm going to sign off right now, and we'll still be available in the chats to speak there. But this is me out. Take care. Bye bye.